He died, but it was not the end. It was an awakening from the dream we call life. Carl Gustav Jung, a man who had devoted his life to other people's dreams, suddenly found himself inside his own. It happened in 1944, a heart attack, the body in a hospital room, doctors shouting, and he was already not there. The pain snapped like a thread, the world shattered like a mirror, and his consciousness slipped out. He looked down and saw the earth, a tiny blue sphere hanging in silence, so quiet, as if suffering had never existed. Jung later recalled, "I was rising higher and higher. At some point it no longer mattered who I was. The name, the titles, the body, all of that stayed below." He heard no sounds, only the soft, vibrating breath of the world. Space pulsed, as if alive. Then came the light, not bright, warm, endless. It did not fall from above. It came from within, from the very fabric of reality. Jung felt that every particle of this light knew him like an old friend, without words, without judgment, only knowing. Before him rose a building, enormous, like a temple, but without walls. Everything inside breathed eternity. In the center, a black stone smooth as a mirror. On its surface flickered sparks, like the breath of the universe. He understood. If he took a step toward that stone, everything earthly would vanish. Everything that had been Jung would dissolve. And suddenly, a voice. From nowhere. Quiet, yet undeniable. "You are not finished yet." One moment, and he fell downward. The light faded. The silence tore. The air grew heavy. Pain returned. The heart beat. He opened his eyes. A white ceiling. A nurse in tears. The smell of ether. He was alive. And his first thought, it was not a vision. It was real. From that day, he could no longer speak of death as an ending. He had seen it, not as disappearance, but as return. He began to write about the continuation of consciousness, that life is not a straight line, but a circle, that death is not destruction, but transition. But what struck him most, there was no fear there. There was peace, and deep, all-encompassing knowledge. He said, "Everything I searched for in books, in analysis, in other people's dreams, was there, beyond the body." Jung returned a different man. The doctors rejoiced at the miracle, but he was silent. He looked out the window and thought, "They don't understand that I have already died, and been born again." From then on, his gaze changed. There was quiet in it, as if he could see through us, to the place where everything begins and ends. He spoke of death calmly, as of a familiar road. "I don't believe in life after death. I know it." When they asked what he had seen, he smiled. "It cannot be described, it can only be remembered." He began to speak of symbols, of dreams, of loss, of circles and spirals. He said, "Every loss, every pain, is the language of the soul preparing to return home." The world around grew louder, and he quieter. He no longer argued about theory. He simply knew, a person is not the brain, not the body. A person is that which does not die. He survived. But from that day on, he felt not whole. As if a part of him had remained there, where time does not move. He lay in the hospital room listening to the ticking of the clock and realized, before, that sound had simply been time. Now, it was the pulse between worlds. White walls, nurses whispering, "He isn't sleeping again." But he couldn't, because that light still stood before his eyes. Not an image, not a dream, a presence. It seemed to watch him, gently, calmly, like a parent watching a child. He wrote in his diary with an uneven hand, "I live on the border. My body is here, but my soul still there. And sometimes it looks at me from afar." At night he saw the temple again, but now it was empty. Only the black stone shimmered, as if waiting. Jung awoke and his heart beating fast, but not from fear, from longing. He felt that place was home. During the day he was silent. The doctors rejoiced. "Dr. Jung is recovering." He simply nodded. He knew. To recover meant to return to a world that now felt like a dream. Once a colleague came to see him, sat down beside him, asked, "Do you remember what happened?" Jung looked straight into his eyes and replied, "I remember, but it wasn't a dream or a vision. It was me, without a body." The colleague smiled awkwardly, thinking he was delirious. But Jung didn't argue. He understood. One cannot reach that place with words. After being discharged, he returned home, to Kusnacht, to the shore of the lake, a garden outside the window. The air smelled of grass, but everything seemed different, as if the world had shifted slightly, become more transparent. Sometimes he would stop among ordinary things, books, a pen, a cup, and feel they were alive. In every object, the breath of that light. He whispered, "Even matter remembers where it came from." In the evenings, he sat by the window, looking at the sky. And suddenly, the same radiance, thin, barely visible, like a reflection in the air. He froze, feeling the boundary become thin again, almost invisible. He wrote, "There are no distances there. Everything is here. We simply do not see it while we believe in walls." Sometimes he woke in the middle of the night. The house was quiet, only the wind in the garden. And it seemed to him someone was nearby. No fear, only knowing he was not alone. He told his students, "After death I understood. Consciousness is not born. It returns. The body is just a form, like clothing we take off." People listened, nodding, but didn't understand. He could see it in their eyes. They searched for proof while he had only a feeling, simple, wordless. Sometimes when he spoke about his experience, his voice would grow quieter, almost a whisper. "The hardest thing is to stay here, after that light." He began to notice. His patients' dreams were changing. They saw spirals, circles, ascending paths. He wrote, "The collective unconscious knows the way home. We have simply forgotten how to listen." In the mornings, he took his cane and slowly walked through the garden. The trees rustled, and in every movement of the wind he heard that same music, the rhythm beyond life. Once he said to a friend, "We are all waves. We rise, break, disappear, but the sea remains." And saying that, he smiled, like a man who had already seen the sea from within. He began writing new notes. They were short, almost like prayers. Death is not darkness. It is a return to oneself. Everything we lose returns in another form. Life is preparation for remembrance. He spoke more softly, moved more slowly. The haste had left his eyes. Even pain he accepted calmly, as a sign that he was alive. Those who met him said, "He has changed. There's a strange peace in him, as if he knows something we don't." And it was true. He knew. He tried to explain, to himself, to his students, to the world. What he had experienced was not a miracle. It was part of human nature. He said, "We do not create consciousness. We connect to it. It is the source and we are sparks." After that light, everything he had written before became alive. Archetypes, shadows, dreams were no longer theories. He understood. It was the language of the soul, remembering who it is. He wrote in his diary, "The collective unconscious is not an image, but a space where all living things are connected. There is no I and you, there is breath, one for all." He felt that death was not an end, but a return to that breath. Not disappearance, but merging. One day a young man came to him, after a coma, his eyes, tired but clear. He said, "I saw myself standing in a tunnel, and at the end, light. And someone said to me, 'Not yet.'" Jung fell silent, as if recognizing those words, then quietly asked, "Were you afraid?" "No," the man replied. "There was no fear, only peace." Jung later wrote, "My experience is not unique, it is shared. We all remember the light. Others came too. A woman told him she had seen a river in her dream. On the other shore stood those she had lost. She reached toward them but could not cross. She woke in tears. and in relief. Jung wrote, "The unconscious teaches us death long before it arrives." He began to see the archetype of death in everything, not as an end, but as movement. Like ebb and flow, inhale and exhale. He told his students, "Imagine an ocean. Each wave is a life. It rises, sparkles, falls, but the ocean remains. We are waves. Consciousness is the ocean." He found confirmation in myths. The Egyptian Book of the Dead, the Tibetan Bardo Thodol, Christian visions, Indian Upanishads, different languages, one story. The soul passes through the gates of light, sheds the body, meets knowledge, and returns in another form. He wrote, "Death is the inhale and exhale of the universe. It pauses and breathes again." Once he listened to a woman who had lost her husband. She said, "He came to me in a dream, said, 'Don't cry, I'm here.'" Jung asked, "And did you feel him?" She nodded, "Yes, as if he were the air." Jung smiled. "So it is," he thought. "We do not die. We change the shape of our breath." He said more and more often, "The memory of death lives in each of us. It awakens in dreams, in intuition, in the moments when we feel there is something greater." He wrote, "We are not afraid of death. We are afraid of forgetting who we are." People listened to him. Some nodded. Some stayed silent. Some couldn't bear it and left. But he didn't persuade anyone. He knew no one believes until they feel it themselves. Sometimes he sat by the fireplace, watched the flame and whispered, "All religions speak of the same thing, in different words, but about one truth. Consciousness continues." He no longer sought proof. The world became a symbol. Day and night, breath, heartbeat, and all reminded him, life and death are not enemies. They are two movements of one breath. He wrote, "Within me live those who were before me and those who will be after. I am not a man, I am a bridge between times." And when one student asked him, "But what is it all for?" Jung replied, "So that the soul may learn to recognize itself, and so that, when the time comes, it will not be afraid of its home." After he returned, everything became different, not the world, himself. He told his friends, "I used to think that life leads to death. Now I see death leads to life." He became gentler. He looked at people as at children lost in the fog. Each carried fear inside but called it by different names: anxiety, exhaustion, ambition. He wrote, "All human neuroses are fear of the end, disguised as concerns." One day a woman came to him. She had lost her son, young, with trembling hands. "I can't breathe," she said. "I keep waiting for him to walk into the room, but he doesn't." Jung was silent for a long time. Then he quietly replied, "He hasn't gone. He has simply stopped needing a body." The woman burst into tears. "How can you say that? You don't know what it means to lose a child." Jung looked straight into her eyes. "I do. To lose means to remember that nothing belongs to us, not even love." She fell silent, and suddenly breathing became easier. He wrote afterward, "Sometimes words don't heal. Presence does." He spoke more and more often about the shadow, that part of us we hide. "If you don't meet your shadow in life," he said, "it will meet you after death." He saw that people feared not death, but meeting themselves. A writer came to him once, grey-haired, exhausted, eyes dull. "I can't write. Everything feels meaningless." Jung poured tea. "Do you feel that time is running out?" "Yes, and I haven't done anything." Jung smiled. "You have. You lived." The writer looked at him, and for the first time, light flickered in his eyes. He often repeated, "Only the one who is ready to die is capable of truly loving." Love to him was no longer passion. It was surrender, dissolution. He said, "Love is a small death that teaches us the great one." He stopped fearing loneliness. It became his friend. He wrote, "When a person is alone, they hear silence, and in it, God." Sometimes students asked him, "Dr. Jung, do you believe in God?" He replied calmly, "I don't believe, I know." He said it without a trace of pride, simply as a man who had seen the light. He wrote about the symbol of light, about the movement of the soul. All religions, he wrote, speak of one experience, returning to the whole. Only each has its own language. Once he listened to a young soldier. The man had returned from the front, couldn't sleep, saw darkness. "There was too much death there," he said. "I can't feel life anymore." Jung looked at him gently. "Then you have seen both sides. Now learn to breathe between them." The soldier wept, and for the first time fell asleep right in the chair. Jung realized death teaches us not to lose, but to let go. He said, "As long as we hold on, we suffer. When we let go, we begin to be." He no longer wanted to be right. He wanted to be whole. Sometimes he walked into the garden, sat on a stone by the water, looked at the reflection of the sky, and whispered, "We are not born from nothing. We return from the light, and to it we go." He understood that suffering was not a mistake. It was the body's memory of the soul. "Pain," he wrote, "is the language through which the soul reminds us we are not the body." He saw how people tried to hold on, to love, to youth, to meaning, and he said, "He who is not afraid to lose is truly alive for the first time." With the years, he became even quieter. Words turned into glances, glances into silence, and silence into peace. And when he was asked near the end, "Do you still fear death?" he answered, "No, it was my teacher," and added, "We are born to remember how not to die." In his final years, Jung lived by the lake in Küsnacht. The house stood among the pines right by the water. In the mornings he would sit on a stone, watch the sunlight fall onto the surface, and think that life flowed the same way, fading but never ending. He no longer wrote about theories. He wrote about peace. "The closer I am to death," he said, "the more everything around me feels like a dream from which I am about to awaken." He no longer waited for the future. He lived in the present, as in eternity. Every day a gift, every breath a reminder. Books lay open, letters remained unanswered. He listened to the silence, and in that silence he heard again the same breath that had accompanied him there. Sometimes he wrote down his dreams. In one he stood at the top of a mountain. Below him, a sea of light. He knew if he took a step, he would fall into it, and everything would end. But in that ending was a beginning. He wrote in his diary, "I saw the temple again, but now there was no fear in it, only a call." One morning he said to his daughter, "Everything is becoming transparent." She thought he was speaking of old age, but he was speaking of eternity. Sometimes he received his students. They waited for revelations, secret formulas, words that would change everything, but he simply sat across from them, silent, looking into their eyes. And suddenly, the person would begin to cry, not from sorrow but from relief. Jung said, "Sometimes silence heals deeper than words." An old patient came to him once. "Doctor, I'm afraid to die." Jung nodded. "That's normal. We're all afraid of what we already know." "Why?" "Because we've forgotten." And he added, "When it all ends, you'll realize that nothing ends." He often repeated, "Death is not the opposite of life. It is its completion, its meaning." He spoke of it calmly, as of returning home. "A drop does not disappear in the sea," he said. "It becomes the sea." Sometimes when the sun was setting, he whispered, "I'm already on the threshold, and I'm not afraid." He hardly wrote anymore. Words felt too narrow. "Language was created to conceal the mystery," he said. "Truth is understood through silence." One night he couldn't sleep. He sat by the window, looking at the stars. Then he said quietly, "They're calling." In the morning he looked peaceful. He told his loved ones, "When I go, don't look for me in the cemetery. I won't be there, I'll be everywhere." A few weeks later he was gone, without pain, without fear, as if a person had simply taken off his clothes and walked out the door. That night the lake was still, the air stood motionless, as if the world itself was listening. And then a gentle wind passed over the water, like a breath. Those who knew Jung said, he didn't disappear, he remained. In the garden, in the books, in the words that still echo today. As if someone who once returned from the light could never truly leave. In his notebook, they found a final note. The life we live here is a preparation for the great passage. We learn to die so that one day we may awaken. When you read these lines, the light seems to breathe between the words. Not blinding, warm. The same light he saw there. Perhaps death is not an end, but simply the moment when we remember who we have always been. And somewhere, in that silence between worlds, his voice still sounds, quiet, clear, calm. You are not finished yet.